Hi, everybody. This is Dave Emmons and the Dave Emmons Show. And today, my guest is Thomas M. Ferrario, and he's known and he's been known in the UFO field for some time. He's worked with a lot of experts. He's also got a couple of common friends of myself, Debbie Zieglmeyer, and I guess she's been around for some time, and she's a diving person, and also Thomas has been into the diving thing. He's the dive master. So I don't want to read off his bio, but before that, we're gonna also introduce the radio station WDY Radio out of Maryland. Eddie Carson is the man there, and it's OdysseyRadioLive.com, and they're going to be carrying the audio portion of the show, and I will be distributing the video portion out on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, LinkedIn, and the such. So Thomas M. Fiorio, he got my interest because of the people that he knows and the people he's worked with, and he's had a long history. Thomas has worked as a dive master, machinist, and electrical engineer on projects in the United States, Red China, and Bermuda. Very interesting. He has been an independent UFO researcher since 1969 to 1998, at which point Walt Andrus, founder of MUFON, asked him to become a section director for MUFON. Later, he would go on to assist state director for Missouri MUFON. He then co-founded the MUFON dive team with Debbie Zieglmeyer. I heard of that. It's been mentioned on TV, and I actually done some stuff in Alaska. I don't know if you were with him, but maybe you talked about it. Talked to us about that. Ferrio then joined Ted Phillips, in which I know quite well, and a lot of people in the ufology studies knows him as an assistant in 2006, and later became part of Ted's SL or SIU team. So it's SIU, I guess, college, right? That's because that's close to me. He assisted Ted Phillips on his Marley Woods, and that's one of the things we're going to talk to him about, Marley Woods project and his Tetra Mountain Moonshaft project that's coming up. He knows people like Stan Friedman and Ben Henson, and the list goes on. He'll probably tell you more of those people. I've seen him in a picture in Facebook, and you can look him up on Facebook. Also, he has a picture of surrounded by a lot of ufologists that are experts and very well known in the field. So very impressive, Thomas. I know that you wanted to talk about your 49 years of ufology, and you're knowledgeable and you're insightful. I guess working with brilliant men in which you've kind of absorbed some of that knowledge from them, and you were working around the government, not with the government directly, but other people. Could you tell me something that I might have missed on your bio, and then explain this 49 years of ufology?
Well, hello there, and it's great to be here, Dave. And yeah, the bio pretty well covers it all. I just would like to, I got started in this through a gentleman named Bruce Whitteman, who passed away recently. Was the first state director for the Mutual UFO Network, which used to be the Missouri UFO Network originally. And I got in connection with a gentleman named Walt Andrus. And I live in a rural area and spoke about some of my cases with him. And I found out that some of my cases overlapped with Project Blue Book. So he was impressed, I guess, and he made me a section director. And I called Bruce Whitteman, which was the state director at that time. He told me to reach out to Bruce, and Bruce at the time said, "Well, number one, you're not even a member of MUFON, and number two, I make the section directors, and we'll see if we can get you some training and get you to join MUFON." So I met with Bruce then in St. Louis, Missouri, and he put me in connection with a gentleman named Jim Cross, which was a retired Air Force pilot captain from the Korean War. And I worked with Jim Cross for 2 years, going out on investigations, and so that was my official introduction into MUFON and ufology. But I did have experiences. My family had sightings. I had one pretty dramatic experience when I was a young boy, and
Could you explain that to us? I mean, we're interested in how people get started as an
yeah,
experiencer. Could you tell us that story?
yeah, I will briefly.
Okay.
But actually, my family members had experiences citing things, and Actually, in one case, it might have been an abduction scenario. And as a young boy, where I lived in a rural area, one evening I thought it was a thunderstorm. Actually, I went to my window, crawled up on a cedar chest, looked out my window, and as I'm looking out at my window into the field, and this is something that I had a problem with for years, actually. I was looking out my window into the field, seen flashes of light, and then the strangest thing I could ever imagine was a now what's known and commonly known as a reptilian. This upper part of the body, which yeah, I went back, I measured the height of my window, would have put this creature at probably approaching 7 foot. But as I'm looking out my window, I noticed something on my right coming into my vision, and it's the profile or the side of this, reptilian type of face or head. And as it gets right in front of me, it turns and looks at me with these yellow eyes right into me. And it just, at that point, my next memory is I'm on the floor in my father and mother's bedroom. My father gets up out of bed, actually wakes me up, steps on my stomach, which he was extremely mad because he thought he injured me.
Yeah.
And he said, "What are you doing in our room? What are you?" And I said, and through I was about 4 years old at the time. I told him, I said, "Well, the only thing I could draw a resemblance to, I called him T-Rex man, was at my window." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I explained the story to him. And so that is my most dramatic and one-time experience. And it was several years later before I could even compare that to anything. That in that day, reptilians weren't that well known, and
Right.
I had no comparison to draw it to till I got involved with MUFON, and in their catalog, that was some of the entities that were reported. And so that was my own personal experience. And the unique thing about this was that Bruce Whitteman, the state director for MUFON, he believes, an abduction experience. And it was, as the crow flies, Bruce only lived a few miles from me. So there was a connection. We always felt that we didn't know each other back then, but we felt there was a connection. And but that was my first involvement. And it went on then when my father moved into a rural area, and I started being the go-to guy in the rural area, people seeing things, having experiences, and they knew I wouldn't ridicule their sightings or reports. And when you get to have that trust in a rural community, everybody that has that goes to you. And it's a much wider phenomenon than you can believe
Yes.
me.
Yes. And, like Dr. David Jacobs says, 50% of the people who's been abducted, they don't even know it.
Right.
I seen here where you appeared on Coast to Coast with George Norrie and Coast to Coast with George Knapp, and you filmed the original UFO Hunters TV show, which I just saw here lately. And that was an episode of UFO Witness with Ben Hansen and Melissa Tittle. And that episode aired just a couple of weeks ago, like you said here in the notes. And I saw that, and it was very interesting. You were there, right? Filming that with them?
Yes, we were all there together. And when we got out to the place, they had some experiences right off the bat. Ben and Melissa had the habit, they would synchronize their watches. And Melissa had just had a new watch she bought. And we barely got on the property, and she noticed her watch had stopped, and Ben's watch had actually, it was out of synchronization, of course, with hers. And that was their first introduction. And the experiences for them, I will tell you that we had several things happen out there, and it's all undocumented on the film, and everything happened the way it did in the episode there when they were out there. it was an incredible experience, you know. And one of the things I I am friends with the people that produce Skinwalker, and uh, I know those people and what they're going through. And at Marley Woods, we always felt, and Ted proved it, Ted Phillips proved it, that the microwave energy spectrum was the bad guy involved and did the damage to the animals and us. And so I always said, you know, when I bring individuals out to Marley, I would be prepared to monitor that and to protect them from microwave energy. And I had a new piece of equipment out there on the show that it had visual cues, you know, it was green, yellow to red, and audible cues that just dedicated to microwave energy spectrum. And while we were out there 3 times in the middle of a field, you know, at night, 2 in the morning, this piece of equipment went off into the red area, green, yellow, and right in the red for a brief period. And I really monitored. I started getting worried about this, and but 3 times I had that hit, and so I warned them, and then had state of the art thermal imaging equipment and night vision, and he had some experiences, some things he picked up out there, and Melissa, of course, she keyed in on my hearing over the years. It's not what it should be. She has excellent hearing, and she noticed a couple times when, and it's a dead giveaway in cases like this, that when we were out there, the night sounds, insects, all the sounds of the night, a couple times just completely shut off. I mean, it got dead still to where you felt something was monitoring you. And as they filmed in the show, I warned Ben and them. I said, I truly believe this is a sign to us that, and to me especially, because I've been there and been injured, that it's the phenomena is there. It's monitoring us as much as we're monitoring it. It knows we're here, and expect anything. And we did have we did pick up on a lot of things out there that night.
Yeah. Were you the one who told them that you needed to get out of there because it was getting too intense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed that they had some fear about what's going on there. Uh, I also, you were talking about cattle mutilations at Marley Woods. I guess, is there a lot of that?
Yeah, there is. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cattle mutilation over the years. It was more prevalent back in the 70s and 80s. There were some extreme things that happened. And there again, I go into an incident that happened in Marley called the horse barn incident with a horse.
Yeah.
It was the horse that you're probably familiar with, that very
Mhm.
graphic case,
Yes.
the
Yes,
horse
I
in the
am.
barn. But Ted in one case was there, and the one rancher on site 2 and 3 brought Ted into a fresh cattle mutilation, and Ted asked the man, "How often does this go on?" Now the man took Ted behind one of the old barns in the area, and there, as Ted describes it, was a very large pile of bones and hide and several. Ted kind of just estimated there's probably was 35, 40 head of cattle over the years piled up there. There was no predation, no predators would affect us or touch it. So there was been at least 35, 40 cases of that.
Right.
In
Yeah. I've heard a
so,
lot about that, Thomas, about Marley Woods. Of course, I'm not that far away from it. I must mention that, some of the people you've been with, they were excellent mentors: Ted Phillips, Ray Stanford, Bruce Whitteman, and of course, Stan Friedman. Debbie Zieglmeyer, like I said, I know her. She's a great person too. And I guess, I do have some commonality with you, and I think that's another thing that drew me to you, and also your experiences with ETs. Now, the ET that you saw, the reptilian, did he have scales, or was his face had whiskers or anything?
it I can't go into great detail about that. I just described the head as looking reptilian that night, and it turned and looks looked me straight in the eyes with large yellow eyes
Hmm.
that I'll never forget. And you know, in the process working with MUFON, I did sit in regressions. I help people go through regression. I had the opportunity, as Bruce Whitteman did, to have regression ourselves. Uh, I never felt the need for it. And the thing about being an investigator, you never interject anything yourself into the
Right.
investigation.
Hmm.
So I felt it was easier for me. I didn't really need to know anymore. And of course, you can't share this with anybody. And you know, in investigation, like even MUFON teaches, you can't even interject things like body language when you're interviewing someone on a
Hmm.
case. You can't even nod your head yes in agreement with them, and subtle things like that. So I never felt the need to do regression. I've sat in on it. It can be a very useful tool. It's done a lot of good if it's done right, and there's follow up with the people.
Right.
But it was, you know, it just, I never had the question in my mind the reality of the subject matter.
Right.
And and the phenomenon is so wide, you know. As Ted Phillips was a nuts and bolts man in the beginning, working with Professor Alan Hynek, and that's where I wanted to be too. I was comfortable with, you know, I wanted the structured craft, go out and like Ted did, measure compaction, judge the craft was 10 to 20 tons from compaction. He could judge 20, 30, 60-foot diameter craft. That's where Ted was comfortable. But as he said over the years, like Professor Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée has said, that it's not as simplistic as little green guys coming here from Alpha Centauri.
Right.
Uh, this phenomenon is so wide and varied that it goes into parapsychology. It goes into just every walk of the strangeness that you can imagine.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, it goes into consciousness and dreams and everything like that. They can get in our minds.
yes,
Do you sense in Marley Woods, was there a portal there? You
you
think?
know, we absolutely, and Ted proved it that there was. And again, Ted said in his early years, you'd have said if I would have said the word portal, Ted said you could have just knocked me down. But he did capture things coming through. We have some imagery of what we called the light source,
Right.
which was on site 2 and 3. We view it from site 1, and we see objects coming through this at times. Very directional portal. We proved that. So, yeah, yes, there are portals there, and now the portals, you know, with the different type of cryptids we experienced in Marley, we learned that there doesn't always have to be a visual cue for a portal. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't.
Yes.
Sometimes things can slip in interdimensionally in and out when they don't want to be seen or observed, and you don't have any sense of that happening.
Yeah.
So, but we did prove it that there was, and
Have you ever used infrared cameras maybe to witness these things coming in and out? That might pick it up.
you know, we had in the day we had very crude night vision.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Now I will say when we were on UFO Witness with Ben Hansen, Ben had the state-of-the-art thermal imaging unit, one of the best that there is, and what we did pick up on that on site 2 was Ben seen an object coming, and he said, I don't know if this is a small animal or what this is. And I looked at it through his piece of equipment and I said, no, Ben, that's spherical and it's off the ground. And we observed this thing floating above the ground, going across in front of us. About that time, his several $1,000 piece of equipment, brand new, went out. And I asked Ben, I said, does this equipment have a habit of doing this, Ben? And he said, no, it never has. And it came back on and we caught the object for a brief instant again. He directed his people, producer by radio and Melissa on the ground, to try to get to that location. And then just in an instant, this light ball was gone. Now, the interesting thing about that was I could not see this on night vision. I could not see it with a naked eye with binoculars. Uh, and which, had we had this thermal imaging equipment all the years that Ted and we were out there with our team, how many times, and I really truly believe this was a precursor to this thing being getting into our visual spectrum, we could see it. So how many times were these light bulbs around us that we didn't have any knowledge of, that we could only see with thermal imaging? We don't know. And it just opened the doorway that, and I will tell you, any more that I do research out there, we absolutely will have that piece of equipment out there, because I feel it really opened a new avenue on how to detect these things.
I saw that, and you did detect something, I think, with
Yeah,
this device in the show 2 weeks ago. I watched that whole show because really highly interested in Marley Woods. I wanted to give a shout out to Margie K also to
yes.
in Kansas City, and she's also got her own blog radio, and she does a fine job with that. She's very knowledgeable, along with Debbie Zieglmeyer. Uh, and I wanted to say Joe Palermo, who passed a couple of years ago, he was of great help to me with my camera work in my house, and he's the one who looked at my films. I sent them to him, and he wrote back. He said, "Yes, Dave, that's a reptilian looking in your camera." He said, "That's the Michelin Man." He explained that. I never knew what the Michelin Man was. He told me. He said he interviewed a colonel that worked, Air Force colonel that worked with Michelin Men, the tall whites. They had these suits with the rings, concentric rings around them. So nice guy, and I know you know him. He was just a great, nice guy. There's a great group. I don't go there much anymore because of the travel. Number one, and number two, there's there's dangers in certain areas. So
Oh,
we know
yeah.
that. But I'm sure, and I will give you a copy of this video, so you might be able to share it with Debbie and with Margie K. But
I'd love to do that.
okay, you're fine to do that, and I'm really, like I said, I'm glad to hear that all the people that you worked with were outstanding in their field. Uh, I just wanted to ask, in this radiation, this microwave, that's that Cuban thing, isn't it? That hurts people's brains, like in Skinwalker, it makes bumps in their brain.
Yes, it affects people very dramatically, and I will tell you, they recreated their experience in that Skinwalker, and I do know the producer out there, and some of the, it's a very real thing they're dealing with, and we experienced that at Marley, and I myself, Ted, other individuals over the years have been injured by it. I myself, they recreated a scene, Ted and I, in my vehicle, where this light beam came up on our vehicle, and we got out and we seen this light retract. And I know a little bit about lighting, as I say, and it retracted with a very definite cutoff into like a twisting reflex motion of an old camera. And that night we got back to where the property owners in Site One built a 2-story structure for Ted, where we slept and had his office. And Ted, he got sick, vomited. I didn't do that. In hindsight, I thought probably would have been better. I got home within a couple months, and I have documentation of this with photos. My hair color went from, and I was treated by the local doctor. I couldn't touch my scalp. They thought it was shingles. They tested me, it wasn't shingles. All the local rural doctors said, was it some kind of burn? Maybe you got out in the sun too long, which didn't make any sense. But within a couple of months, my hair color turned from dark brown to blonde to white, what it is now at times.
Wow. So you were actually a brunette. I mean, a brown hair.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I've got imagery with the same haircut, not much growth. It went from dark brown to blonde to whitish in a couple months. And if that'd been the extent of my damages, I would have been happy. I ended up years later, a couple years over the process, having vision problems.
Hmm.
I went in the local eye doctor. They sent me to a specialist in St. Louis, Missouri. I had a condition called macular cyst and
Hmm.
cataracts. I asked them what caused the macular cyst. They didn't know. They said usually in age, older people. They lasered that, which it's a very it can be a good outcome, or it can be you can lose vision. And I was lucky; I had a good outcome. They lasered off the macular cyst and cataracts they took out, and when I went back for my final, they took my bubble off, protective bubble off. The young surgeon, I asked him, what I wished I knew what causes this, and they're just in passing. The young guy told me, he said, well, the only time I've seen this in a younger person was we had two cell tower workers one time, and one of them was up on the tower, and they forgot he was up there, and they fired up this microwave equipment, and they zapped him pretty good, and he ended up they took out macular cyst and cataracts, because
Really? Wow.
your eyes are the most sensitive part of your body
Mhm.
to microwave energy. And so you could have knocked me over with a feather. And then when I told Ted about this, Ted gave us the full discretion to speak about this, but Ted's research was as such that he felt this would take the focus off the research, and he didn't feel like the researchers out there should be part of the research so we didn't speak about it for years, and wish we had, because later when we shared it with the property owner, we found out that one of the property owners had the exact same thing, that with his scalp and hair, that I had.
Right.
So it happens, and it's real, and it's something to keep in the back of your mind, that this stuff is nothing to play around with.
Right. You say it was a bright light that hit you. I had a bright light hit me too. It burned the back of my eye, and the eye doctor was very curious about it. She said, do you arc weld? I said, no, but I saw a bright light in Nevada. I was going out there for a convention in Alamo, Nevada. And so I got hit by a bright light. And after that, I couldn't see very well for a while. And I was on the little road, and it hit me like a wave of energy. But I heard that this Cuban thing, these mysteries in China and also Cuba, that it's silent to everybody else, but if they target it to you, it sounds like a cricket in your ears. Yeah.
It's called the Havana syndrome.
Right.
It's the microwave auditory effect, and it's very real. And unfortunately, or fortunately, our military is experimenting with that now. You can actually transmit sound with this microwave energy and make it actually recreate the sound in a person's cranium.
Yeah.
To where, and you can imagine what you can do if people start hearing voices like
Right.
that.
Thomas, we're gonna have to go to the second segment, so we're gonna stop right now. WODY Radio in Maryland, Eddie Carson's, that's OdysseyRadioLive.com, and this is the Dave Emmons Show. We'll be right back after this pause. Okay, we're right back. And I guess people watching the video are kind of wondering what's going on. They stopped, the video's still there. Well, we're doing this for the radio, for the WODY radio. That's in Maryland, Eddie Carson, and OdysseyRadioLive.com. And this is the Dave Emmons Show. And my guest, Thomas Ferrario. Ferrario. There's the allergies and the dry mouth.
Easiest way to say it's just like the sports car Ferrario.
Ferrario, yeah.
It's Ferrari with an O.
That was just a dry, like I was telling you, allergies. I mean, we're all human. On the radio show, I come out and I talk about the real things that happen to us, and if somebody, I slip up. Everybody slips up. But we were talking about Thomas. We were talking about Marley Woods, and we got into this microwave energy. And you were just saying about the Cuban syndrome, and could you finish up on that probably?
Yeah, the Havana syndrome, that's very real. It's the microwave auditory effect, which our military is using it now. They're developing it, and you can actually transmit sound with this microwave procedure, and you can actually make the sound appear in someone's cranium. Only the individual focused on, the energy focused on, can hear. And you can imagine hearing voices like that, what that can do to a person. And originally, the effect was found out from people working actually in World War II with high gain microwave radar, technicians were actually started hearing voices transported from like control rooms and that, and they started hearing and they couldn't understand how they could be hearing the voices transmitted with this radar. And the more they worked with it, the more they found out that they have that capability. And it's like we dealt with the microwave energy spectrum is what we felt was the bad guy in Marley Woods that did all the physical damage to myself, people on the team. And as they're finding out in Skinwalker right now, I know the producer and
Right.
some of the people, and they're living with that damage with some of the individuals now. So it's a very real phenomena that is real, and you always have to keep that in the back of your mind that you could be exposed to this.
Right. Have you appeared on Skinwalker Ranch? I know I watched that show. It's a pretty good show. They're very scientific about everything they do.
No, I haven't been on the new show. I there's some talk about we were gonna go work together on that, and we're still talking about that. But I will tell you that I can speak about it now. In the early days, when Robert Bigelow owned Skinwalker Ranch, we did work. We had a connection. Robert Bigelow worked with us at Marley Woods, and his people were out at Marley Woods with us, and so we did have that connection for a while. So, we're working on something right now, and who knows how that'll turn out, but we do have a lot of commonalities. I will tell you that Skinwalker and Marley Woods, and there are some other places now, as I call her my sister, Debbie Zieglmeyer, the state director for MUFON, is finding out even in Missouri. So for whatever reason, the phenomena is becoming more prevalent, whether the dimensional barriers are breaking down, but you're seeing more of these places now around the world.
Right. And I'm doing a book, Angels and Watchers, and I got into the Nephilim, the giants. And there was in '02, there was a squadron of special ops soldiers who ran into a giant Nephilim, and this Nephilim killed one of the soldiers. They said he's 13 feet tall, weighed about 600 something pounds, and he was and they talk about that in the Bible, the return of the Nephilim. They could disguise themselves. They could be shapeshifters. They could be reptilian, like you were saying a while ago. And even Jesus mentioned them, said the end times, like Noah's times, are coming, and
Yes.
and you'll see Nephilim starting to return. That's weird. That's weird. Have you ever seen weird people or giants or other people that you suspect could be a humanoid alien?
We have all type of cryptids in Marley. I will tell you, we have not seen, of course, the only Bigfoot sighting in the county was right in close proximity to Marley Woods. We have a variety of cryptids. We have 300 to 400 pound giant white, and this sounds so strange, polar bear like / sloth type animals.
Really?
And
Wow.
we got, when these things come through the dimensional barriers, they're there. We've got 16-inch long white hair that we found on a 4-strand barbed wire fence. We did microscopy on, we did crude DNA work in the day, came back no known match. We had plaster casts we took of the prints of this animal, very unlike anything else that there is. So we feel like, when these things come through the dimensional barrier, they're there. They're as real as you and I. Now, do we think there's a living, breeding population of these creatures there in Marley Woods? We know there isn't. But when things like that come through the dimensional barrier, we feel that it's real as you and I,
Right.
So
Yeah, I know that Marley Woods is a secretive place. They don't like giving out the location. Do you go there quite a bit, or do you visit there quite a bit?
not as much as I'd like to. I've been there once the last couple of months, and I like to try to stay there at least a week or two when I am there. But it's really an extreme trip for me even to make from my home place. But Ted we always wanted back in the day to have a round the clock presence at Marley, and we wanted to have what our goal was to have when we had our excellent website up that Adam Johnson, a team member, had made, and of course we had to take that down when we were affiliated with certain people, but Ted's dream was to have a system of trail cams, and I've looked into that now. You can have cellular trail cams. I'd like to have on a website. Anybody could go there day or night, anytime, and view and actually help us watch these areas for activity. And I've even looked into getting these things hooked up when it's still poor internet connection. I've even looked into, having like sat phone connections with satellite phone, but it's cost prohibitive. It's really so, but and we keep the location, not out of trying to build intrigue in it, but just we owe it to the people that didn't want to have their farms, overrun with people and their identities known. So there again, these people that made these claims, and Ted had approaching 300 witnesses at Marley that didn't want to be known. And so, what personal gain, what possibility of making this stuff up would they have? So that showed the reality of this.
Right. What are the owners? Are the owners living in fear all the time? Do they see a lot of stuff, I guess?
They're not living in fear. I will tell you, they're getting up there in age. They're great people. And the gentleman on site 2 and 3, who we filmed with Ben Hansen, that property, I will tell you that about 6 weeks after we filmed that episode, and we did film a lot of footage, which there may be other episodes out there that we're going to edit and put out. But the gentleman, the property owner on site 2 and 3, passed away with a stroke. So we did lose a very great man, a very gracious gentleman, and just a wonderful guy. And he was such a loss to us out there.
Yeah.
Because his knowledge, he was in his 80s. And let me tell you, this stuff goes back 3 generations in Marley Woods and more. We even believe it goes back into Native American culture. So
what about UFOs? Do you see a lot of UFOs there?
Yeah, we've had structured craft. We've had, the property owner site 1, they seen what appeared to be a approaching 150, 160 foot cylindrical black UFO one evening going home over the road out there, at times motionless. Then it moved off at a very high rate of speed. Rows of yellow windows on this craft. So there's structured objects. We have more of the light ball phenomena out there, which along with the cryptids, we would see light balls in conjunction with cryptids at times. And then that goes into a science. You have different colored light balls. You have white, which is more benign, blue. When you get into the yellow and the red, which the red light balls seem to be the ones that have the most potential for damage. They precede what we call the unseen force. They exhibit vast amounts of energy, and Ted experienced these things. And as yourself, Ted experienced it. He was called in, Dr. Heineck, when he was sick, or different cases. He had prior engagements. Ted went around to about 20 different countries, and he had an experience actually in Vietnam with red light balls that was really took out a village in Vietnam. So the red light balls are really the bad guys. But we have structured craft, unseen force. We have it all there.
Right. Now you mentioned cryptids dimensionally. What's your opinion about Bigfoot? Is he the same thing?
Yeah, we actually believe, and that gets back into Native American lore. The Native Americans would call all these things the tricksters. They have the capability of going interdimensional. It's much more complex than them hiding behind a tree, I will tell you. They can morph in and out of our dimension. That's why I truly believe unless they want to be seen, they'll never be seen. And it gets back into, even as you had touched upon, it gets into the Nephilim and ancient history. They've always been here. And, it's something we've dealt with out there in Marley and along with the other cryptids.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I in studying the angels, angels can be invisible. They shapeshift into humans, and distance and time does not matter to them. I mean, they come from afar, just like these dimensional creatures you're talking about. So if you really want to talk spiritually, angels are shapeshifters, and they are extraterrestrial also. So
yes.
we have to call all this stuff like it is. Now, you mentioned numerology in your notes. I don't know if that's I didn't see all the notes on numerology, but were there some numerology insights? And it was a Glennis McCants. I guess she did some numerology on that. And
There's been a little bit, not so much at Marley. There's been some of that back in the days with the first Skinwalker people. We had actually people out there, and I'll cut this whole story down shortly, but
okay,
we had Jacques Vallée spend time out at Marley with us. We at one time we had Douglas Trumbull, which that name you may recall, that
yes,
he did the special effects for Close Encounters,
right,
and Brainstorm and others. And Douglas he was making equipment at the time, very exotic and high-tech camera equipment to capture ufology, aim the stuff, targeting with laser and EMF machinery. And he actually put one of these pieces of equipment in a cabin at Marley, and they locked the door. The next morning we went out there, and Douglas was kind of aggravated. He thought somebody messed with his camera. There was a piece of equipment on a heavy tripod, weighed 80 pounds. And this thing had been turned 30 degrees away from the window in a locked room overnight. So, and that goes back into the Skinwalker days.
mm-hmm.
They had experiments with high-speed cameras, as we did in the old cabin at Marley. Now this sounds extremely boring, but they would put high-speed cameras, 3 of them, on a tabletop with things, just common things like a set of keys, a deck of playing cards, and these 3 high-speed cameras. These objects would be caught moving from point A, B, and C in the location, but with high-speed cameras, they would never be caught in motion, which they determined the only way this was possible was the dimensional aspect, that these things would actually move interdimensionally in these points. And that's the only way they could explain this happening. So, these people that worked with us out there, they really had, let me tell you, they had pulled their hair out trying to figure this stuff out over the years. And
it seems like the more we know, the more questions we have, right?
yes.
Oh,
Exactly.
and that light flickering in behind you. I know the audience, when they see this, they're going to say, well, there must be energy flowing in and out of the room because the light's flickering. You told us it was a flame kind of burning light.
Yeah, that's a flame bulb that I have
Okay.
in the background there.
Yeah. So yeah, you'll hear me talk about little crazy things on the show like this, but I just want to point that out. But you were a dive master, and I think you worked with Debbie Zieglmeyer because she's a diver, and you
Yes.
lived in Bermuda, and you lived in China. How did that come about?
Well, I worked with an industry and no intrigue about it. I was actually doing some electrical project. I worked with an industry, and they had some machinery, and I had to go to China to make sure the electrical requirements for the machinery was up and running and sufficient for this equipment that they had, and it was in red China, and I was probably in places where I was the only American these people had ever seen, they tried to run this equipment with generators and things like that till they got power strung in. So, and it was the same instance in Bermuda. I was there just to make sure some equipment was running properly. And now Debbie Zieglmeyer, I call her my sister. We're very close.
Right.
We started the MUFON dive team years ago under the sanction of John Schuessler, which was one of the founders of MUFON again. And we did some incredible things. We were getting funding. We were going to do some dives in Shag Harbor and Puerto Rico in different aspects. But the funding, even that we were promised, unfortunately, through MUFON, people that promised us the funding, it never quite lived up to the expectation that we had and what they said. But we formed a MUFON dive team that could respond anywhere that MUFON, if they had something in or out of the water or debris they felt. We trained in a quarry where we actually submerged the old satellite dish in the quarry as that was our target, which appeared to be, underwater, looked like a disc.
Right.
And we learned some interesting things, just that mass of metal we could find using our compasses underwater, that large dish would actually throw our compass off to where we could find it using our compass. So we worked with that, and we did other interesting things in that quarry, training divers how to respond. And so we felt that was really, and Deb still got that up in MUFON, that when they need that entity that they can respond yet. So
yeah, I saw a show with Debbie Zieglmeyer up in Alaska. I think she did some diving there.
She did.
And
she did a tech dive there.
Yeah. And were there any anomalies found by you or her of UFO anomalies?
We found it, unfortunately, what we had done, it was years after the fact. And, things like in Shag Harbor and that, it's just so long that we feel that everything is probably gone. And, but we were always hoping to get involved in something current, and that would happen. And now, and I just have to say at this point, my sisters, Deb's written this book, and it's The Alien Colonization of Earth's Waterways. And Deb's got that book. It's a great book. She's put her heart and soul in that, and very many years of putting that book together. And
was that just released?
Yeah, it was. And even Ted Phillips would have told you that. And everybody, it's a little known fact in ufology that actually, when you track it down and you get involved in ufology, 2/3 of ufology or UFO reports have a commonality of water involved in them in some way, shape, or form. We feel 2/3 of the cases, water is a factor. And that's quite a statement.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think the UFOs have bases underwater, deep underwater and everything right now. You're looking at making a documentary called Project Moonshaft, and that's going to be in Slovakia. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Is that still an ongoing project?
Yeah, it very much is. And Ted Phillips, actually, and just a very brief history of what Project Moonshaft is. It involves a gentleman named Anton Horek, which was a Czech mining engineer from a very wealthy family, that in World War II, the Nazis took possession of his family farm and mines. And this even goes back into Madame Curie actually bought her first uranium from Anton Horek's family. So that's just a little bit of the history, but the whole bit of the story that is so unbelievable, Anton Horek joined the underground and was captured by the Nazis, and he escaped along with some of his men. In the process, they were wounded. They got to a very mountainous area in Slovakia. A sheep herder found them, a man called Slovak, and got them, hid them in a cave, which to this day, for whatever reason, it's supposed to be illegal to explore caves in Slovakia for whatever reason. But they hid the man and his two men in the cave and told him not, he gave him the blessing. He told him not to explore the cave, don't go any farther. The sheep herder brought him food and water, hid him from the Nazis. In the process, over days in the cave, Tony explored the cave. He got into a region of the cave that opened up. He found a large black onyx-like crescent-shaped object in this cave that was embedded went as far as he could see in the mouth of the cave, in the roof of the cave. This thing had stalactites, stalagmites growing over it. He shot it with his military rifle, made a green spark, didn't even damage it. He found a fissure, a crack in the bottom of it, and he had to remove most of his clothing to squeeze through this, and he had a little carbon arc torch. He squeezed through this, slid down an embankment. The thickness of the cave approached 10 foot in thickness of this object. When he gets down in the bottom of this object, he shined his crude light up. He couldn't see the top of this object. He went back 2 days digging in the floor of this, and he finally got into the bottom of the floor of this thing. And as he got scraped, he found fossils. He found actually cave bear teeth, which again denotes how old this thing was, because cave bear teeth are ancient.
Right.
As he digs to the bottom of this, he describes that he found as he dug, he said the warm air hit him in the face. Small particles of this hit him in the face. He found a 1-inch grill, like 1-inch segment, wavy grill in the bottom of the floor of this thing. And he put his ear to the bottom of this grid, and he described what he could hear as heavy turbines running deep below. Now, the man was a mining engineer. He knew caves, he knew machinery. This has no possibility of an explanation being there. It makes no sense geologically, time-wise. So you have instrumentality sitting there, self-maintaining, running all these years, and for what possible purpose?
Right.
So he gets out of the object, gets back to his men, which the next day one of his men dies, and there's several feet of white bandages there that they tried saving the man. Long story short, he gets out of the cave, escapes the Nazis. He goes back one more time after the war to try to find the object. The Nazis had carpet bombed this area and caved in part of the cave, and he couldn't get back all the way to the object. Now, Ted Phillips and Alan Hynek were made aware of this object. Anton Hurek made it to the United States and actually lived in Colorado. And the story got to Ted and Alan, the report. They went interviewed Tony, and Ted went on he went back on an exploration. He actually got back to the cave, found it. He was there twice. He found the bandages. He knew he was in the right cave. And they would have had to do some mining or to get into this section of the cave. And Ted had to go back. Unfortunately, the geopolitical climate at the time, the Russians were after this object. The Russians knew of it. Even the Germans knew of this. So he went back to try to get some funding. And actually, you might know the connection. Jackie Gleason was very involved in ufology and paranormal. And Jackie Gleason actually worked with Ted and Hynek on funding to go back to excavate this object.
Wow.
And unfortunately, a war broke out, and Ted couldn't go back that time. Now, jump forward to today, where I'm in touch with the original family, the people in Slovakia. And we had the funding. We were going to do a documentary. So again, what happens in the region? We have a war broke out, and the Russians are very much in this area again. But we do believe it's still doable to some degree.
So you
So
guys are going to try to get over there. We're only got about a minute left. So I
yeah,
wanted to get into what your thoughts of disclosure, but we'll have to go through this real quick. You believe that there's going to be a false flag with the aliens, and we all kind of believe that, right? And
I
yeah,
I
so yeah,
I absolutely do.
yeah.
And
Okay, and that's about all we can cover. We're just about to the end of the show, Thomas. It's been great. I wanted to keep listening to that one story, and I know Jackie Gleason. He was shown ET bodies, from President Nixon. So yeah,
yes,
that's great. But yeah, this false flag, we all of us ufologists believe that's going to happen, and there's going to
every
be
man, I just want to add, every man I've talked to in ufology, from Ray Stanford, Ted, Alan Hynek's belief with it, uh, you know, Stan Friedman,
yeah,
everyone has told me that it's a false flag. Don't believe it. It's going to be, they're not going to be here. Even Rod Serling made a movie about it.
okay.
Uh,
Well, that
so,
I guess that ends our program. This is the Dave Emmons Show. My special guest Thomas Ferrario, and we're going to have this aired out. I will have this up in a couple of days. So you're listening also to WODY Radio out of Maryland, and it's OdysseyRadioLive.com. Thomas, thank you so much. It was a very interesting show. Thank you, and good night, all.
thank you.
Thank you.